The history of Russia's military has had its high and low points throughout history. Their victories against the Napoleonic armies in the 19th century and the Germans in World War II have been elevated to an almost religious degree. At the same time, their failures against the Polish, Finns, and Afghans have been put aside. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia experienced economic hardship and political instability. It lost its dominance over the former republics and was reduced to a regional power that saw NATO encroaching on its sides. Some formerly tightly held Soviet republics gradually pulled away from the Kremlin's control, while others chose to stay closer to Moscow, fearing the potential repercussions of distancing themselves. When Putin took power after the Soviet collapse and a decade of crisis in the 90s, he started to rebuild Russian pride around its past, mixing Russian nationalism with Soviet elements. With its economy's stabilization and growth in the 2000s due to a rise in oil and gas prices, and a series of minor military successes against Georgia, its involvement in Syria, the annexation of Crimea, and the onset of the war in Donbass led many to believe that their military had been rebuilt from past failures. This led many, and maybe the Kremlin itself, to believe that it could wage a war of aggression against Ukraine, and that in a matter of days, the government in Kiev would be in its full control, while extending NATO's influence further and further from Moscow. In the wake of the 24th of February 2022, after several months of military buildup and growing political tensions on the border between Russia and Ukraine, the invasion finally came. Although the Russians made quick advances in their initial weeks, they were quickly stopped by the unforeseen Ukrainian resistance, which prevented the Russians from achieving any of their strategic objectives in the north. With the Russians unable to take Kiev and topple the Ukrainian government, their position became unsustainable. Now, with their logistics far too overstretched and a lack of prepared troops to man the whole front, the Russians had to retreat while maintaining their southern front and their land bridge to Crimea. The following stalemate can be compared to the Great War, or, more recently, the Iran-Iraq War. The Russians suffered major setbacks around Kharkiv and Kherson due to Ukrainian pressures, while making advancements, mainly in the oblasts of Luhansk and Donetsk. Their forces could not advance just a few kilometers at a time. The battles were reduced to attritional warfare around small villages and cities instead of the land-swapping advances they envisioned. The Ukrainians, while receiving material support from the West, were unable to halt the Russian advances, turning battles for even the smallest villages into months of exhausting warfare, with enormous costs in terms of lives and equipment. Although Ukraine's situation has improved, it still presents challenges. The country is constantly under pressure to defend itself against Russian advances, and recent military efforts, like the 2023 counteroffensive, haven't achieved the expected results. At the same time, Ukraine must carefully maintain its relationship with the West, which provides most of its military supplies, and are likely gaining a significant influence in Kiev. In any conflict, countries around the world often align themselves with one side or another. A clear example of this is NATO, which play a crucial role in strengthening Ukrainian defenses against Russian actions. The recent passage of a $61 billion aid package by the US Congress has been vital for Ukraine's recent advances against Russian forces in Kursk. However, shifts in the political landscape and developments in the war may influence the West's willingness or ability to continue supporting such initiatives on that scale. On the other hand, Russia is experiencing increased diplomatic isolation. Many of its historical allies cannot provide significant support, while more prominent allies like China must carefully navigate their relationships with Russia and the West. Over the past 2 decades, Belarus has become one of Russia's closest allies. Lukashenko's regime depends on Russian backing to maintain power, and has even allowed the use of its territory to facilitate the invasion of Ukraine. Additionally, Iran has strengthened its ties with Russia in response to growing isolation, playing a crucial role in supplying drones to Russian forces. More recently, North Korea has stepped up its support, initially providing ammunition and missiles, and now is even sending troops to assist on the front lines. A war of attrition like this one can end in 2 main ways. Either both sides reach a point where they see no further political gain from fighting and agree to terms acceptable for both, or one side collapses, a collapse of the Ukrainian government in Kiev, and a Ukrainian military in disarray would open the door for Russia to realize its goals with minimal resistance. However, Russian forces grapple with significant challenges. Russia's ultimate objective in Ukraine is to bring the nation under the Kremlin's full control. This could mean outright annexation, or, more likely, a partitioning where the eastern Ukrainian territories are absorbed into Russia, leaving a puppet government in Kiev to act in Russia's interests. But given Russia's current struggles, this grand ambition seems increasingly unrealistic. Moscow may instead settle for a more limited outcome, such as annexing Ukraine's easternmost territories to create a defensible border, securing some level of influence in the region, and attempting to justify the last years of fighting to its people. For Ukraine, the endgame is to expel Russian forces from its territory, dismantle Russia's capacity to pose a future threat, and open the path towards joining the European Union and NATO alliances that would fortify its defenses against further aggression. Yet, this vision is also filled with obstacles. The Kremlin is unlikely to relinquish all its territorial gains achieved over the past 2.5 years, challenging Ukrainian goals. A compromise appears possible, hinging on several future developments, the internal political dynamics within both regimes, evolving international alliances, and both sides' readiness, or necessity, to relinquish specific ambitions amid an ongoing conflict. If Russia intensifies its pressure on Ukraine, and significant shifts occur in the geopolitical landscape, it could pave the way for Ukraine to consider accepting new terms. Understanding these options not only gives us an insight into how the war might end, but also what the aftermath could look like. A peace deal could take various forms. It might be a peace treaty agreed upon by both sides that establishes new borders in Europe for the foreseeable future, or the current front lines might simply freeze, leaving high tensions between both parties. Undoubtedly, this war has changed the future of Europe in this century and has consolidated a divided world that will shape the future of our times.